Welcome back to part two of our interview with Erich Kurschat. In part one, we left off talking about DISC and how to use DISC in order to communicate effectively with individuals. We are going to go on further in this part to talk more about the fundamental tenets of DISC and go on to some really interesting places. I hope you enjoy.
Yeah, so, and I agree. Do you mind just sort of sharing the basic fundamentals of DISC for people who are not familiar with it?
Of course. So there are four primary disc styles, D, I, S, and C. We're a blend of all four styles, but we gravitate toward one or another. And it often depends on the relationship that we're in, the conversation that we're having, the environment that we're in. One of the things I love about DISC is it reminds us we do have some agency, even though we have some
Mm.
consistent personality traits that conversation to conversation, we can choose behavior that's going to be beneficial to us.
Yeah.
And I know with your sales background, et cetera, your business background, that that idea of being able to adapt to other communication styles is so valuable.
Yes.
D is that dominant style, very direct and decisive, very time sensitive and competitive. Let's get right to business. Value producing, of course. The I, or influencing style, is very high energy, enthusiastic, energetic, great with the big picture and selling in the broadest sense of the term, influencing others to see their way of viewing the world. The S, or steadiness style, is still people focused, but it's more dialed back in terms of their energy. They first and foremost want to be of service to others, very cooperative and big on having all voices be heard and gaining consensus if possible. And the C, or conscientiousness style, is valuing accuracy above all else. Detail, having T's crossed and I's dotted, but being right and ensuring that what they submit or say is, of a fairly high standard.
Yes.
We're a mixture of all four, but we gravitate toward one or another style as it benefits us. And my job is to help teams and consultants learn how to do that more intentionally.
Yeah. So we talk about this not in the DISC framework per se, although maybe we should, is in interviewing, right? Because you said salespeople tend, to be very good at kind of reading the room basically, and like, who am I talking to, and how do I adapt on the fly? And that, I think that's very true. Unfortunately, most people aren't salespeople, and so when you're interviewing, you're selling yourself, and you can be at a distinct disadvantage of resonating with the other person, as you say, communicating the value that you bring, because you're not speaking their language in a way that they're most able to receive the value that they're looking for. And so, we talk about remixing, where basically the melody is the same. You're a music guy. The melody is the same, but we've remixed it to where if I'm talking to a D, I might be very focused on the outcomes, the results, the measurable things that we did, in a timely way, on budget, those kinds of things, like you get shite done kind of stuff. And if I was telling the same story to a C, it'd be right, very rigorous process, just very, very high, focus on quality, and accuracy, and that, the work was right. And we took a lot of pride in the work was right. That's what, but it's the same story. It's just being remixed to kind of dial the treble up or dial the bass up, depending on what's going to help that person understand the value that you bring. And the way that I say is the resume might get you the interview, the stories you tell, and I think I would say parenthetically, and how you tell them is what gets you the job. And how those stories are heard is what gets you the job. And I think that, what you're talking about is just so fundamental. And again, I do want to make sure that we keep this, also through the lens of HR, because HR can have such a profound impact on an organization when these key messages are communicated in a way that the audience can best receive them.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm so glad you've pointed out that application originally about the job seeker, because I think that that's one that gets often overlooked by people who are in search of meaningful work and in pursuit of meaningful work. They think of DISC or other assessments as a way to sort of bond with an existing team, an intact team. And I come along and say, well, what if, in interviewing for a job within an organization, you were to realize that person A that you're speaking with today has a certain way of seeing the world and a certain set of values and communication
Mhm.
preferences. And then person B that you're going to speak with tomorrow has a completely different set of values. Yes, they both work for the same organization, but your ability to progress through the interview process may come down to your ability to adapt in the moment to the person sitting in front of you.
Mm.
And on the flip side, then maybe if that person sitting in front of you is in talent acquisition or in HR, imagine the value to that person who's working for the organization to be able to speak a language that the candidate feels comfortable with, that gets them to share valuable aspects of their story and the value they bring in the things that they've accomplished in previous jobs that they have. I mean, it's all about enhancing these relationships, and oftentimes the relationship is between a job seeker and an HR person.
Exactly, exactly. And so, we just fundamentally believe that at the end of the day, people hire people, and we hire people that we, like and trust. And to the extent that there's less static on the line and more harmony on the line, that people can
Yeah.
actually, and I said that on purpose, but that they're speaking the same language. The melody resonates with both of them in a meaningful way. That's when really great connections get made. And again, I don't want to skip past, you know, the role that HR can play, and as an HR professional who might be listening to this, to be able to understand the value. It's not just what you say, it's how you say it, and how that can change appropriately depending on who it is that you're talking to.
I worked for a woman during my time with Levy Restaurants who was masterful at this. And it would be easy to say, well, that's, that in the wrong hands, something like DISC or a similar assessment can become manipulative. And she demonstrated that it's not manipulative. It is simply being able to adapt to um, speak multiple languages. I would step into her office and she would connect with me in a particular way. She knew what I needed from her. She knew the sort of detail that I was going to need to accomplish what I needed to accomplish. And I would step out of her office and somebody else would step in and she would take on a different communication style, but it was always in a very genuine effective way. And I think that was sort of my introduction to the possibility that HR professionals of all sorts, but honestly, leaders across the organization, with a common language like DISC, can build a skill that allows them to connect and communicate with their stakeholders in ways that they never have before.
Yeah.
That the salesperson, or the talent acquisition professional, or the frontline manager can have greater influence than they ever realized they could have, simply by recognizing that remix that you're talking about can make or break a relationship.
I remember a number of years ago now, but I was working at a market research company. So a lot of C's at a company like that, where they're very, about the methodology and the accuracy of the methodology. And they're very analytical and rigorous in how they went through and thought about things. I'm an I all day with an appropriate dash of D. And, um, and so I was giving our sales strategy because, as you said earlier, eyes like strategy, and I love strategy. And so I was presenting our sales strategy for the year. And of course, I thought it was pretty amazing. And so I'm like at the end of it. And so, well, and that's it. And are there any questions or comments folks have?
Mhm.
Crickets. And I'm
Mhm.
like, what the heck?
Yeah.
And so, okay, so fast forward, meeting over, and one of the younger analysts who, I had a good relationship with, I'm like, Angie, what the heck? Like, like nothing? Like, really?
Mhm.
And she's like, Bob, you have to understand, like we just want to process. Like, it would almost be irresponsible to give you a visceral reaction without
Yeah,
having given it sufficient soak time
I
and
love
really
that.
kind of process it. And this has been 20 years ago, and that has stuck with me because I was a leader at a company who was communicating ineffectively to an audience that wasn't able to receive the message the way, or maybe it's more on me. Like I wasn't able to get the feedback that I wanted because I didn't understand my audience.
Right.
And so that's just been a very lasting memory. Now, when I've got a framework like DISC to help me go, oh, kind of here's the dynamic. Now I can kind of anticipate it.
Mhm.
Back to your point, though, on the HR person that was like, really masterful at this, and you said that people sometimes could perceive that as being manipulative. I'm like, oh my goodness, no, I think that's the definition of empathetic.
Yeah.
Like she's trying to meet you where you are. Like,
Yeah.
I think that's compassionate, empathetic, authentic. I think
Yeah.
those are really, really good things. It's not Machiavellian at all.
No. You always get some skeptical folks in the mix, and I've been that skeptical person on occasion, and I think that and I've had people come back, and that's the only reason I mention that. It's not because she was in particular perceived as manipulative, but I've had people following a workshop saying, in the wrong hands, couldn't this allow somebody to be manipulative? And of course that's always the case, right? That if I'm being disingenuous with you or attempting to get something from you that is not in your best interest, then of course, then that's not ideal for anybody. But if I recognize that DISC as a common language can help me, just in the same way if you were to travel outside of the country, right? So you go outside of the country and you sit down at a table and you need water for the table at dinner. If you can ask for that water in the local language, two things are going to happen. Number one, you are going to potentially get that water more quickly than you would have otherwise. And two, I would argue, most importantly, or more importantly, you're going to communicate respectfully with the people in that country. And I think DISC is similar in terms of language. If I understand your DISC language or preference, as we say, and I can speak to that in some sense, even if you don't realize that DISC is behind it, you might say, you know what, I really appreciate that Erich seemed to be able to speak my language, that he seemed to value what I value, and we were able to have a productive conversation as a result. DISC may never come up in your thought process,
right.
But if you leave feeling seen, heard, celebrated, some of the things I mentioned previously, that's nothing but good.
Not only nothing but good, it's also highly differentiated. It's highly differentiated. So again, for putting just in the context of HR, but I think this would apply to virtually any function, to the extent that you can create that differentiated brand for yourself, that people really seem to like Liz. Like she gets on with everybody, and she's able to kind of rally the troops to get behind whatever it is we've asked her to go lead. Okay, well, if part of that is because she knows how to communicate effectively with people, and that's why they resonate with her, then how's that not ever a good thing? But also, it's very good for Liz's career because she knows how to go do those sorts of things. Okay, I want to bridge, because we've talked about meaningful work and just how do I kind of identify that, and again within the context of HR, why that is meaningful work for a lot of people and could be for others, and then the role of communication within that, which is what we've just been touching on. But there's a third piece, and I know that it's one that you and I are genuinely passionate about, which is community. And life is a team sport. Careers are team sports. You didn't not last, but you didn't stay at Levy forever, right? You moved on, and we tend to not do the 40 years gold watch career anymore. So having a community is really important. And I guess I would just sort of ask a very broad question, to you to start it off with is, tell us about why community is important to you, and then we'll double click on HR hot seat in a minute.
I would argue the most fascinating piece of this question for me is that I'm on the introverted side of things. So that's not to say that introverts don't do community or connection or communication. Those are three big misconceptions of introverts. But at one time, had you told me, Erich, you were going to be running a professional networking organization for HR professionals with thousands of members in 14 different licensed chapters around the country, I would have thought you'd have me confused with somebody else. Had you told me that I was going to be, for a living, facilitating DISC workshops, I would have thought you would have had me confused with somebody else. And I'm bringing this up now to go back to our initial point that meaningful work surfaces and makes itself known in ways that you might never expect. The work that I've chosen to do is not something that I could possibly have planned. It is something that has evolved. When I realized I had to do more networking than I had been doing when I was happily employed, when I realized that I was going to do or need to do more networking than I had originally done, I started figuring out where people were coming together, and I went to those places and found that some of it felt to me transactional and superficial. That yes, I was collecting business cards, I was coming home and didn't really, number one, know what to do with them, or two, care to do much, because I hadn't really gotten to know anybody in a meaningful way.
Yes.
And so I decided, you know what, I would like to create the community that I would want to be a part of, where you can connect meaningfully with other people, to bond over the common challenges that you face, the meaningful work that you would like to be doing or that you are doing, etc. And at first it was sort of an act of faith, I suppose. I still wasn't convinced that there was as much value in community as I was hearing other people say there was. It wasn't until I began to experience for myself what it was like to come together with others who were similarly wired, who had similar concerns and fears and challenges, that I realized how indispensable that community can ultimately be, in your journey of finding and pursuing meaningful work. I've created that community through the HR Hot Seat mastermind, but at the same time, I've also sought out that community in so many other places. And I hope I'm in a position now where I embrace it much more readily and build it much more readily than I did when I was sort of naive or ignorant to the value that community can truly bring.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned a word in that I wanted to get to, because it's a confusing word for a lot of people, which is network and networking.
Yeah.
Right. Talk about something that's got, some people feel is manipulative and using people for my own gain and things like that. What would you say to somebody that's like, networking's gross? First of all, to your point, I'm introverted. So meeting people like that just kind of cold or doesn't feel right. And how's if I'm just not using people?
Yeah. As it so happens, I actually do a conference session called Network Like an Introvert. Valuable tips for all personality styles. One of the tips I shared during that session is that the people who are often least comfortable with or excited about networking, or least comfortable in the spotlight, are often the slowest to realize that they can choose where that spotlight is pointing. So one of the first tips that I share is step out of the spotlight. Put somebody else in that spotlight. Bob, it's so good to meet you. Tell me about the work that you do, why you enjoy doing it. Don't tell me what you do. I'll learn about that. Why do you do the work that you do? If people were simply to open with that line, tell me why you do the work that you do, instead of what do you do, it would completely change the tenor of the conversation. So then someone like me, who would prefer to stay out of the spotlight, I'm a little bit more analytical, I prefer to listen rather than speak at times, it checks all of those boxes and gives you a chance to feel as though, you are being highlighted and you're being valued in some way for your background and your experience and some of the things that I'm asking you about.
Yeah. So, I ask you those 5 questions at the beginning, and we call those Rock's Fab 5 in honor of my friend Rock Robinson, who taught them to me, because when you're meeting people, like finding some common ground, like I want to learn about you, to your point, like, why do you do what you do? But even something, as so fundamental as, where were you born and raised? I didn't know you went to school in Ohio. Really? I live in Ohio, and this is genuine. I didn't know about all your music stuff. I want to connect you with Joey after this call, because Joey also is a singer. And there's another guy I'd like to introduce you to, who's also a professional singer and does some very cool stuff. Right. Yeah. But that's finding things that are in common. But what's also implied in that, the first LinkedIn article I ever wrote was called "The Most Powerful Question You Can Ask," which was on the back of a networking meeting that I had where somebody wanted to meet me, and they were extremely uncomfortable coming to me, and they had a high level of shame because they were in job transition and felt like they were bothering me, and so felt like a net taker in a call like that. And what I learned coming out of that was like how to the goal should be, I'd love to find a way to help you, Eric. Like if
Yes.
there's something that I can learn as we get to know each other that I can be of help to you, because I think you would love meeting Joey because you guys have something really in common that I think you guys would love about each other, or whatever it might be. That when we go into networking with the spirit of, I want to find how to make deposits in this relationship, not just make withdrawals. Now, I also believe, and I think this is definitely true, sowing and reaping is a real thing. When we sow into relationships, then a natural outcome of it is we will also reap on another day, right? Because when you sow, it bears fruit. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just some days, we're the fruit giver, some days we're the fruit getter. And it's okay. That's a relationship. That's a mutual relationship where one person isn't always, giving and it's the philanthropist or the benefactor, and somebody's always the receiver, and it's just net taking from the relationship. That's when it's goes through balance like that, that's healthy, I think. And the doubling up from that is being in community. So that's kind of one-to-one, but now how do we come together with folks who are all kind of trying to go in the same direction? And again, I would love for you to just share with folks a little bit more about what HR Hot Seat is, because you've built something very unique. And I'd love to just help share with our HR professional friends what it is that you've built.
Thank you. It was at first intended to be a traditional mastermind group of 10 or 12 people that got together on a regular basis, built accountability and trust and some of those things that you would expect out of a mastermind group of that size. And I realized very quickly that I was going to have to figure out how to grow with it, because the group was expanding beyond the original 8 to 10 folks that I had in mind. And it's not because anything that we were doing was rocket science. I think we were just providing a safe, confidential space for people to come together, both learn from one another, but then also teach and give back in the same conversation. And I love your point about being focused on serving other people. I think often when we're networking, we're so focused on what we need. Well, I need a job, or I need a connection, or I need an introduction, that's what we lead with. And
Yes.
there are more effective ways to open a networking conversation than, my name is Erich Kurschat and I need a job. When you can then come into community with fellow HR pros, for example, in this instance, and realize that, geez, we have so much in common, that we are really faced. And I have people, we were virtual for 33 months, 33 consecutive months during the pandemic. I had people staying up till 3 a.m. in Nigeria and Tel Aviv and other parts of the world to attend our virtual events, showing up to tackle the same challenges that we were tackling here in the United States. And I think that was just a reminder that wherever we are in the world, wherever we work, we do face similar challenges to other people who are doing similar work. So, in a nutshell, we have 14 different chapters, thousands of members, and we're coming together in this mastermind style conversation, all for free, to help our members tackle the real life, real time challenges that they're facing in their work or their job search. There is no single subject matter expert in the room. Everyone brings equally valuable experience and perspective, whether you're a practitioner, a service provider, or even a student or in job transition. I try to pack more value into our free events than people would expect. And then people, I hope, walk away inspired to do their best work, but also very, very eager to support one another.
Yeah. So, and irrespective of function, because I hope and suspect that there are other functional, sales, marketing, finance, whatever, but within the context of HR, that being able to, one, you said, have a safe space, which is like I may not be able to share this with my boss because I could get fired, or I'm afraid I might get fired. So it's a safe space. Getting various perspectives, right? Maybe somebody who's more of a mentor type of a relationship. And it's like, I really understand what you're feeling. I felt the same way when I was at a similar stage. What I found was, and it's like, oh, so just getting some different perspectives, some new information. Have you tried this? I don't even know that model. What's that all about? You know,
Right.
I mean, there's just so many benefits to being in community, and in the rapidly changing world that we find ourselves in, things are just changing on the fly all the time. Black swans are becoming as common as black crows. It seems like it just happens all the time. Something new and crazy and what the heck is happening. And not being in community really increases your risk of struggling to get through the next thing, because you don't have a safety net, you don't have the social structure, and as we know in job search, you're most likely to find your next job through your network.
Right.
And kind of related to the sowing and reaping metaphor, we'll also talk about going to the ATM when you absolutely need $100. You haven't been making deposits in it.
Right.
It's, sorry, dude. Like, there's nothing here for you because you haven't been
Yeah.
making deposits in it. And as you said, in your masterminds, you've got people that sometimes I'm asking a question, sometimes I'm giving an answer. You can be making deposits and withdrawals at
In
the
the same
same time.
conversation. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's all really, really good.
And if we return to what we mentioned earlier about HR professionals burning out these days for real reasons, for very valid reasons, I'm warmed is not the right word, but I can't think of the word that I'm looking for, but reassured, I suppose, by the HR professionals that I know that have found community, including in social media, that took to social media saying, you know what, I just, if I don't find something soon in terms of support and help and reassurance, I don't know how much longer I can last in this position. And so they'll start connecting with people on LinkedIn, start connecting with people on Twitter, find a group like HR Hot Seat, come to you and say, Bob, who are you connected with? What communities would you recommend? And have those communities become the difference.
Yes.
Rather than then stepping away from a job that really is rewarding, fulfilling, but just is overbearing and overwhelming in the moment, realize, no, I can do this. I can do this HR work, or to flip it, I can remain in my job search, something that has been just so difficult for me and so, taxing at times. I can continue to do this because I'm intentionally surrounding myself by people who are making it their life's work to lift me up and support me at a time when I need it most, knowing that I will certainly reciprocate when given the opportunity. So what you're hearing, and I'm so glad I stand for these conversations, I couldn't possibly sit down for them. What you're hearing is, an introvert who is still very much introverted, but has learned to really appreciate the value of community in a way that I'm so glad I have, because I don't think I would be where I am doing the work that I get to do, the meaningful work I get to do, if it wasn't for the communities that I've both built and become a part of.
Yeah. So phenomenal. Let's put a bow on this, because you just said two of them: meaningful work, community, and communicating effectively with others would be the third. Maybe the way to put a bow on this is, if you were talking to 28-year-old Eric, or maybe somebody who's just a few years out of college, is beginning their HR career, is young in their HR career, what are the 1, 2, 3 bits of advice that you would give them?
I would say, number one, get sleep now, because when you have your daughter, it's going to be harder to come by. This is going to sort of sound cliche, I suppose, given the work that I do, but know thyself. Really spend time being introspective. It's hard work. It's not easily done. Sometimes you hold up a mirror and you don't like what you see. And sometimes you really like what you see and you embrace those things, and the things you don't like, you're quick to dismiss. I think people would have a better chance at defining and pursuing meaningful work if they had a better idea of how they are uniquely wired.
Mm-hmm.
What do you value? What strengths do you bring to the work that you do? What sorts of relationships fill you up and which drain you? What work, to your point earlier, should you just avoid at all possible costs?
Mm-hmm.
Let's take all of that into account. Number two, especially in terms of HR work, recognize that there's no one perfect personality or communication style for it. That, yeah, you're going to find the people that we talked about that very much thrive on emotions and relationships and camaraderie and collaboration. You're going to get folks on the other end of the spectrum that are heads down on Excel all day, working with numbers and, ensuring accuracy in their work. And there's no right or wrong, good or bad about any of it. That it really does take that cognitive diversity across the board in business in general to run a successful organization. So those are two things, be introspective and recognize that there's no one size fits all, that the value that you bring to an organization is very much there. They're not going to know what that value is until you are first clear on what it is and able to communicate it effectively and compellingly to the people in a position to offer you that meaningful work.
Mm. Well, I know that we need to be mindful of the time. We've probably already gone over, but Erich, this has been phenomenal. I'm so glad that we were able to do this. I know that as people listen and watch this particular podcast, they're going to get so much value out of it. I've learned a few things and had a few things reminded to me that I thought I knew, but I'm relearning again. If people want to learn more about Harmony Insights in DISC and HR Hot Seat, I know those are two separate things. What are the best ways for them to do that?
First, let me say, this has been as fulfilling a conversation as any we've had. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you this afternoon.
Likewise.
HarmonyInsights.com, as you can imagine, is all things DISC. And I really get passionate about it. I really get excited to help organizations and consultants bring DISC to life. So I hope people will take me up on my offer to nerd out with them about DISC. HR Hot Seat is at hrhotseat.com. Thousands of members, licensed chapters around the country. So there may be something in your neck of the woods. If not, I organize and continue to facilitate our Chicago chapter, and everybody is welcome. It's a truly inclusive community. And so we welcome people who are practicing HR broadly defined or serving HR professionals in some way, or honestly, anyone just committed to a conversation about how we can better serve the people who matter most to our businesses.
And how much is that fee for HR Hot Seat again?
I'm so glad you asked. It is entirely free, Bob. So you won't pay anything, but you'll get so much more value than you would expect.
Okay. Well, this has been super valuable and exactly what I expected, because I knew what I was going to get with Erich Kurschat. So I would really encourage people to check out Harmony Insights, check out HR Hot Seat. Erich, you're just a great colleague. I'm really glad that our paths have crossed. And just thank you for everything that you're doing to make the workplace a meaningful place.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I'm inspired by the work that you do as well. So let's make sure not to have this be our last conversation.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for listening. And we hope to catch you on the next episode. Bye-bye.